This 4-year-old homeless girl finds a millionaire passed out with 3 newborn babies. But what she does when he wakes up shocks everyone. Comment giving a rating from 0 to 10 for my story. Your opinion is very important, and subscribe to my channel to support my work. I count on your help. The cry of the 4-year-old girl cut through the icy dawn air like a razor, echoing through the deserted streets of the sprawling metropolis. Her bare feet pounded on the damp asphalt, fleeing from something only she could see in the shadows that pursued her. So tiny and fragile she looked barely 2. Her tangled hair swung wildly as she hid behind an overturned dumpster. Her heart beating so hard she felt it would burst from her thin chest. Hunger had gnawed at her stomach for 3 days. Her torn clothes barely protected her from the biting wind that swept the empty streets of the city that never slept, but which now seemed to have fallen into an eerie silence. With trembling, dirty fingers, she rummaged through the trash bags in search of anything edible, any crumb that could quell the pain that grew inside her like a wild animal. That's when she heard it. A low sound, almost imperceptible, mixed with the distant rumble of traffic. Crying. Not her own crying, but something different, higher-pitched, more desperate. Babies. 3 distinct voices blended in a chorus of despair that made something inside her tiny chest clench strangely. Following the sound with cautious steps, the girl turned the corner of a narrow alley and came face to face with a scene that would change her life forever. 3 cardboard boxes were arranged side by side on the cold ground, and from inside them came the cries. Next to the boxes, a man lay fallen, motionless, a dark stain of blood slowly spreading through his messy blonde hair. Even in the dim light of the alley, it was impossible not to notice he was different. His clothes, although dirty and torn, were of a fine, expensive fabric. The cut of his hair, even disheveled, revealed care and style. His features, relaxed by unconsciousness, had a beauty reminiscent of the heartthrobs she sometimes saw on the televisions in shop windows when she ran past the main avenues. The girl approached slowly, like a wounded animal sniffing danger. The man didn't move, but she could see his chest rising and falling in erratic movements. He was alive. The babies, however, cried louder and louder, their tiny bodies writhing inside the makeshift boxes that served as cradles. Without thinking twice, she knelt beside the first box. Inside it, a baby with pink skin and fair hair waved its little arms in the air, its face red from crying. In the second box, another baby, with a moon-shaped birthmark on its neck, looked even smaller and more fragile. In the third, a baby girl with huge, expressive eyes looked up as if begging for help. The 4-year-old girl felt something awaken inside her. Something she hadn't felt since her mother had passed away 2 years ago. It was as if a small but intense flame had been lit in her empty heart. These babies needed her. No one else was there. No one else cared. She picked up the first baby in her arms, her movements clumsy but full of an instinctive tenderness she didn't even know she possessed. The baby stopped crying almost immediately, as if recognizing in those thin arms an unexpected salvation. The girl began to hum softly, a melody that her mother used to sing to her on cold nights, when they still had a home, when they still had a life. One by one, she cradled the 3 babies, discovering that when she sang, they calmed down. Her small hands found soiled diapers and tried to clean the babies as best she could, using pieces of fabric she tore from her own already destroyed shirt. She didn't really know what she was doing, but something inside her knew it was the right thing. The man groaned softly, and the girl turned to look at him. He was trying to open his eyes, an expression of total confusion plastered on his face. When he finally managed to focus his gaze, he saw her. A dirty, scrawny child holding a baby in her arms, 2 other babies in boxes beside her, all in a dark, cold alley. What? He tried to speak, but his voice was hoarse and weak. Where? Who are? The girl watched him with her large, sad eyes, those eyes that had seen too much for someone so small. He seemed lost, scared, as she herself felt every day. Without saying a word, she extended her small, dirty hand towards him, offering the only piece of stale bread she had found that night, her only meal in 3 days. The simple gesture, laden with an impossible generosity coming from someone who had nothing, struck the man like lightning. He looked at that child who was sacrificing her only food for a stranger, at those babies she had taken responsibility for without question, and felt something break inside his chest. Something was very, very wrong. He couldn't remember anything. Not his name, not how he had ended up there, not where those babies came from. But looking at that brave girl, he knew, with absolute certainty, that he couldn't leave her alone. The first hours of the morning brought an even harsher reality. The handsome man, as the girl had decided to call him mentally, managed to sit leaning against the damp wall of the alley, but every movement made his head throb with pain. The wound on his head had stopped bleeding, but the confusion in his mind only intensified. I can't remember," he murmured, running a trembling hand through his hair. "Nothing makes sense. Why am I here? Where did these babies come from?" The girl didn't answer, not because she didn't want to, but because she had long since learned that words were dangerous luxuries. Instead, she watched as he looked at the 3 babies with an expression that mixed terror and something that seemed like unconscious recognition. It was as if his body knew something that his mind had forgotten. The baby with the moon-shaped birthmark on its neck began to cry again, a weak cry that revealed hunger and discomfort. The man reached out instinctively, and the girl noticed how natural his movements were, as if he had done it thousands of times before. His fingers, even trembling, knew exactly how to hold a small child. "They need milk," he said, more to himself than to her, "and clean diapers, and a warm place to stay." The girl nodded gravely. She knew all that, but knowing and being able to solve were completely different things. She stood up slowly, her thin knees creaking with the effort, and gestured for him to follow her. She had a place in mind, a place that wasn't perfect, but it was better than that cold alley. "Can you walk?" she asked, her voice hoarse from disuse. He tried to get up and staggered, leaning against the wall. "I think so. Where are we going?" "Safe place," was all she said. They improvised a way to carry the 3 babies. The man, despite the dizziness, managed to hold 2 of them, while the girl carried the 3rd and the cardboard boxes that served as cradles. The walk through the empty streets of dawn was slow and dangerous. At each corner, the girl looked carefully, checking that there were no cops or people who might ask questions. The destination was a spot under an abandoned bridge, hidden between concrete pillars and sheltered from the rain. The girl had discovered that place months ago and had made it her makeshift home. It wasn't much, but it had some advantages. It was invisible to those passing overhead. It had a water source that dripped constantly from a broken pipe, and it was close enough to the city centre for her to find food in the garbage of restaurants. "It's here," she said, pointing to the space between the pillars. The man looked around, trying to process the situation. There were some cardboards on the floor, an old can that served as a container for water, and pieces of fabric that the girl had collected over the months. It was a home made of scraps and despair, but it was clean and organized in a way that revealed care and dignity even in the most extreme poverty. "You live here?" he asked, a note of horror and admiration in his voice. "Live," she replied simply, as if it were the most natural thing in the world. They settled in as best they could. The girl lined the boxes with the softest fabrics she had, creating makeshift nests for the babies. The man sat with his back against a pillar, still fighting the waves of dizziness that assailed him. The babies had calmed down temporarily, but it was obvious that they would need real care soon. "What's your name?" he asked after a long silence. The girl looked at him as if the question was strange. "Doesn't matter," she said finally. "Of course it matters. Everyone has a name. Names are for people who have family," she replied with devastating simplicity. "I haven't had a family for a long time." The comment hit the man like a punch to the stomach. He looked at that child, who couldn't be more than 4 years old, who was taking care of him and 3 babies without question, who had sacrificed her only food for a stranger, and felt a wave of guilt and admiration that he couldn't explain. "And you?" she asked. "What's your name?" He closed his eyes, trying to force the memories to return. I don't know. I can't remember anything. It's as if my life started when I woke up in that alley." She nodded as if that made perfect sense. "Then you're the handsome man. That's what I'm going to call you." Despite everything, he smiled for the first time. "Handsome man? You're different from the other men who live on the street," she explained seriously. "You have white teeth and soft hands. And your hair shines even dirty." It was such an innocent and direct observation that he didn't know how to respond. He looked at his own hands and really noticed that they were too soft for someone who had been living on the streets for a long time. His clothes, even destroyed, were of a quality that contrasted with the surrounding environment. The first baby began to cry again, a cry that indicated real hunger. The girl approached and tried to calm him with caresses, but it was obvious that he needed milk. The handsome man felt a desperate urgency grow inside him. "I need to get food for them," he said, trying to get up again. "No," the girl held him by the arm with surprising strength. "You're still weak, and you don't know where to find things. I'll go." "You're just a kid." "I know how to take care of myself," she interrupted, with a firmness that didn't match her age. "I know where to get what we need without attracting attention. You stay here with them." Before he could protest, she had already left, her bare feet making minimal noise on the damp concrete. He was left alone with the 3 babies, feeling a weight of responsibility that was both familiar and terrifying. While he waited, he tried to organize his fragmented thoughts. There were flashes of memories that appeared and disappeared like lightning. A luxurious office, important papers scattered on a mahogany table, the smell of expensive leather, the sound of a tense conversation that he couldn't decipher. But whenever he tried to focus on these images, his head throbbed and everything dissolved again. An hour later, the girl returned with a torn plastic bag. Inside was a half-empty bottle of milk that she had gotten from a diner, some disposable diapers that she found in the trash of a pharmacy, and 2 stale breads that a baker had thrown away. "How did you get all this?" he asked, impressed. "People throw away a lot of good stuff," she explained, already heating the milk in the improvised can. "You just need to know where to look and not be afraid to ask." They fed the babies together, a slow and delicate process. The handsome man discovered that his fingers knew exactly how to position the bottle, how to hold each baby so that it wouldn't choke, how to make the right movements for it to burp. It was as if his body had its own memory that his mind couldn't access. "You've taken care of babies before," observed the girl, watching his natural movements. "I think so," he replied, confused. "But I can't remember when or where." As night fell on the city, they organized themselves to sleep. The girl gave the handsome man the warmest blanket she had, keeping herself with a piece of torn canvas. The babies were accommodated between them, protected from the cold by the bodies of the 2. "Why are you doing this?" he asked in the dark. "Why are you helping us?" There was a long silence before she answered. "Because when I found you, you were alone, and I know what it's like to be alone." Her voice carried such deep sadness that he felt his heart clench. "How long have you been alone?" "Since my mother left." "Did she abandon you?" "No," the girl replied softly. "She didn't want to go, but sometimes people can't choose to stay." The handsome man understood that she was talking about something more definitive than abandonment, something that a 4-year-old child shouldn't have to face. He reached out in the dark until he found hers, small and cold. "Now you're not alone anymore," he said. "Neither are you," she replied. And there, under a cold bridge, surrounded by 3 babies who cried softly, 2 strangers created a bond that would change their lives forever. The handsome man didn't know who he was, where he came from, or how he had ended up there. But he knew, with absolute certainty, that he wouldn't let that brave girl face the world alone again. The first week under the bridge turned into a routine of survival that tested the limits of both. The girl went out every day at dawn, leaving the handsome man taking care of the 3 babies in a reversal of roles that he found strange but necessary. She knew the city in a way that he couldn't understand. She knew which bakeries threw away bread at what times, which pharmacies discarded diapers with minimal defects, which restaurants had compassionate employees who sometimes offered leftovers. The handsome man, in turn, discovered that taking care of the babies was both exhausting and comforting. There was something familiar in the way the baby with the birthmark calmed down when he hummed softly, in the way the baby girl held his finger with disproportionate strength, in the way the 3rd baby looked at him with large, trusting eyes. It was as if there was a connection that he couldn't explain. On the 8th day, something changed. The handsome man was changing the smaller baby's makeshift diaper when fragments of memory began to seep into his mind like water passing through cracks in a dam. He saw flashes of a clean white hospital, the smell of disinfectant, the sound of beeping machines, a blonde and elegant woman screaming that she didn't want those children, that they would ruin her life. No, 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 the voice echoed in his memory, full of despair and anger. I didn't sign up for this. It was supposed to be just fantasies, not reality. The memory was so vivid that he dropped the diaper, his hands shaking violently. The baby began to cry, but the sound seemed to come from far away. He remembered now being in a private hospital room, holding 3 newborn babies while a woman, his wife, screamed that she had changed her mind about everything. When the girl returned that afternoon, she found him sitting in a fetal position in the corner of the gap, the babies crying beside him. She ran to him, her small heart racing with fear. "What happened?" she asked, her voice filled with concern. "I remembered something," he whispered, his eyes glazed. "There was a woman. She was screaming. She said she didn't want me, that she didn't want the babies, that everything had been a mistake." The girl knelt beside him, her small hands touching his face gently. "Was it just a bad dream?" "No." He shook his head slowly. "It was real. Very real. I think these babies are mine." The revelation hung in the air between them like a heavy cloud. The girl processed the information with the seriousness of someone much older, understanding instinctively that this changed everything and nothing at the same time. "If they are your children," she said finally, "why were you all lying in that alley?" "I don't know," he replied, frustration growing in his voice. "I can't remember anything else. It's like someone erased pieces of my memory." That night, after the babies fell asleep, they talked in whispers about the possibilities. If the babies were really his children, where was the mother? Why had they been abandoned? And most importantly, what did that mean for the future of them all? "Maybe it's better not to remember," said the girl with sad wisdom. "Sometimes the past only brings pain." But the handsome man couldn't let go of the feeling that there was something very wrong with that whole situation. The fragmented memories that came back didn't make complete sense, but they carried an urgency, a danger that he couldn't identify. On the 10th day, the first small twist happened unexpectedly. The girl was rummaging through the pockets of the handsome man's expensive coat, looking for something they could sell to get more food, when her fingers found something that had gone unnoticed until then. It was a silk scarf, hidden in the inside pocket, embroidered with golden initials that she couldn't read. Along with it, there was a small, crumpled photograph of a pregnant woman she didn't recognize. The woman in the photo was different from the one he had described in his fragmented memories. She had dark hair, a gentle smile, and held her belly with evident affection. "Do you know this woman?" she asked, showing the photograph. The handsome man took the photo with trembling hands. The moment his eyes fixed on the image, an intense pain pierced his chest like a dagger. It wasn't a physical pain, but something much deeper, a desperate longing mixed with guilt and regret. I think so, he murmured, but I can't remember from where or when. The girl watched his reaction carefully. There was something in the way he held the photograph, with excessive care, as if it were the most precious thing in the world, that told her that that woman was important, very important. She looks good, said the girl simply. Looks, he agreed, a lonely tear running down his face. But then why can't I remember her? And why do I have the feeling that I disappointed her in some terrible way? During the following days, the handsome man carried the photograph in his pocket, taking it out frequently to look at. The girl noticed that whenever he did that, he became sadder and more distant, as if the image awakened painful memories that his conscious mind couldn't access. The second small twist came on the 15th day, when the baby with the birthmark developed a high fever. The girl panicked. She had seen babies die of fever on the streets, and the idea of losing one of those little creatures that she had learned to love as brothers left her desperate. He needs a doctor, she said, her voice trembling. Needs real medicine. The handsome man held the feverish baby, feeling completely useless. His fragmented memories included flashes of expensive private hospitals, attentive doctors, clean and silent rooms. But now they were nobody, invisible to the system that had once served their needs. I can't take him to a hospital, he said bitterly. They'll ask questions we can't answer. They'll separate us. The girl looked at the sick baby and made a decision that would change the course of their lives. Then I'll find another way. She ran out from under the bridge, leaving the handsome man alone with the 3 babies. For 6 hours, he didn't know where she was or if she would return. The feverish baby cried incessantly, and he felt more desperate than at any moment since he had woken up in that alley. When she finally returned, she wasn't alone. A middle-aged woman, wearing a nurse's uniform, accompanied her. The nurse looked around the spot under the bridge with a horrified expression, but her professional eyes immediately fixed on the sick baby. "How did you manage to convince her to come?" the handsome man asked in a whisper. "Told her my little brother was dying," the girl replied simply, "that we had nowhere to go." The nurse examined the baby quickly, her training overcoming any judgment about the strange situation. "It's a simple infection," she said, taking medications from her bag. "But it could have been serious if left untreated." She administered the necessary medications and left detailed instructions on care. Before leaving, she looked directly at the handsome man with a curious expression. "You seem familiar," she said slowly. "I've worked in many private hospitals in the city. I have the impression that I've seen you before." The handsome man felt a chill down his spine. "Must be a mistake. I've never been to any private hospital." The nurse nodded, but her expression remained thoughtful. "Maybe, but take good care of these children. They are too young to be living like this." After she left, the third small twist revealed itself. The handsome man, rummaging through the medications that the nurse had left, noticed something disturbing. One of the packages had a sticker with the name of an elite private hospital in the city, the same hospital that appeared in his memory fragments. Even more disturbing was the fact that when the nurse had examined him, she seemed to know exactly what to look for, as if she had already taken care of that type of infection in those specific babies before. "She knew you," said the girl, who had observed everything with keen attention. "I know," he replied, a growing sense of dread spreading through his chest. "And I have the impression that this isn't a good thing." That night, while the babies slept peacefully for the first time in days, the handsome man had vivid nightmares. He dreamed of a blonde and cruel woman laughing while men in suits dragged him from a hospital. He dreamed of the babies being torn from his arms. He dreamed of a terrible fall that ended with him waking up in that alley, without memory, without identity, without anything but 3 children who desperately needed protection. When he woke up, he found the girl awake too, watching him with concern. "Bad dream?" she asked. "I don't think it was a dream," he replied, his voice filled with fear. "I think it was a memory. And if it's true, then we're in much more danger than we imagine." The 20th day brought a change that none of them expected. The girl had left on her morning search for supplies when she noticed something different in the streets. An elegant woman, wearing an expensive wool coat and high-heeled shoes, walked slowly in the vicinity of the bridge, showing a photograph to anyone she encountered. The girl hid behind a dumpster, her survival instinct triggering alarms in her small mind. The woman was beautiful in a cold and calculated way, with perfectly styled blonde hair and flawless makeup that didn't hide the hardness in her blue eyes. There was something in her posture that radiated authority and danger. "Have you seen this man around here?" the woman asked a homeless man who was scavenging nearby. Her voice was soft, but carried a note of barely disguised impatience. "He's been missing for 3 weeks. The family is very worried." The girl managed to take a quick look at the photograph the woman was holding. Her heart froze. It was the handsome man, but a different version of him. Clean, well-dressed, smiling at the camera next to the same blonde woman. They looked like a perfect couple, the kind that appeared in the expensive magazines she sometimes saw at newsstands. The homeless man shook his head, claiming not to have seen anyone. The elegant woman sighed with irritation and opened an expensive wallet, taking out some bills. "If you see this man, call me on this number," she said, handing over a card along with the money. "There's a generous reward for anyone who brings information that leads to him." The girl waited until the woman walked away before running back to the bridge. She found the handsome man playing with the babies, making funny faces that made them giggle. The scene was so sweet and natural that she hesitated to destroy it with the disturbing news. "Someone is looking for you," she said finally, her voice tense. He immediately stopped playing, his expression becoming serious. "Who?" "A woman. Very pretty, very rich. She had your picture." The handsome man's face paled. "What did she look like?" "Hair yellow like gold, eyes blue like ice. She wore clothes that cost more money than I've ever seen in my life." The girl paused, watching his reaction. "She said the family was worried." "Family." He repeated the word as if it were poison. Fragments of memory began to stir in his mind. Violent arguments, shouts, the feeling of being deceived and manipulated. Was she offering a reward? The girl nodded. "A lot of money. Enough to tempt any poor person in this city." They fell silent for a long time, the weight of the situation settling on them. The babies, oblivious to the tension, continued playing, their little giggles echoing through the gap of the bridge in an almost surreal way. "We have to get out of here," he said finally. "If she's offering money, it won't be long before someone finds us." "Where can we go?" asked the girl. "You still don't remember who you really are. And 3 babies can't travel far without attracting attention." It was an impossible dilemma. They needed to hide, but their options were extremely limited. The handsome man had no money, documents, or enough memories to create a real escape plan. The girl only knew that part of the city, and even then, only the darkest corners where people like them became invisible. The next day, the first major twist arrived like a hurricane that would destroy any sense of security that still remained. The girl had decided to investigate more about the mysterious woman and, using her skills of moving unnoticed through the city, managed to follow her to an elegant cafe in downtown Metropolis. Hidden behind a parked car, she overheard a conversation that made her blood run cold. The blonde woman was sitting with a man in an expensive suit, and her words carried a cruelty that the girl had never imagined possible. "It's been a month," the woman was saying, stirring absent-mindedly in her coffee cup. "He should be dead by now." How does anyone survive that long with a head injury and amnesia? Maybe he found help, the man replied. Or maybe he's more resilient than we calculated. The woman laughed, a cold sound that had nothing of humor. Resilient or not, he's getting in the way of everything. I need those babies back to finalize the plan. Without them, I can't access the full inheritance. And if he recovers his memory, then we'll have to be more direct next time. Her voice carried a threat that made the girl tremble. No one will question the word of a devastated widow about how the unstable husband kidnapped his own children before having a fatal accident. The girl needed to cover her mouth with her hands to avoid screaming. The woman wasn't a worried wife looking for her missing husband. She was the person responsible for his condition and had even worse plans for the future. When she returned to the bridge, her small hands were still shaking. The handsome man immediately realized that something was terribly wrong. "What happened?" he asked, dropping the baby he was feeding. "She's not good," said the girl, her voice barely above a whisper. "The woman who is looking for you, she did something bad to you, and wants to do bad things to the babies too." She told him everything she had heard, watching as his face transformed from confusion to horror and then to a cold anger that she had never seen before. When she finished, he was clenching his fists, his muscles tense like an animal ready to attack. "Inheritance," he murmured. She talked about inheritance. "Do you remember anything?" "Fragments. Arguments about money, about investments, about stocks that were worth millions. She always wanted me to change my will, to include specific provisions for children." He looked at the 3 babies, the understanding beginning to form in his eyes. She planned all this. The pregnancy, the marriage, even this. The second major twist came 2 days later, when the girl discovered something that completely changed her understanding of the situation. She had decided to rummage more thoroughly through the handsome man's clothes, looking for any clue that could help them, when she found something sewn into the lining of his coat. It was a small electronic device, no bigger than a coin, that flashed a very faint red light. The girl didn't know exactly what it was, but she had seen similar devices in movies on the televisions in shop windows. It was some kind of tracker. "They know where we are," she said, showing the device to him. They always knew. The revelation was like a bucket of cold water. During all that time, they thought they were hiding successfully, but in reality, they were being watched. The blonde woman knew exactly where they were, probably was just waiting for the right moment to act. "Why hasn't she come to get us yet?" asked the handsome man, crushing the device with a stone. The girl thought about it, her small but insightful mind processing the possibilities. "Maybe she wants you to get weaker, more desperate. Maybe she's waiting for you to die alone, so that it looks like an accident." It was a terrifying possibility, but one that made cruel sense. If they were being watched without being captured, there was a strategic reason behind it. That night, they made a decision that would change everything. They couldn't continue running and hiding, especially not with 3 babies who needed constant care. They needed help, but they didn't know who to trust. "The nurse," said the girl suddenly. "She helped us before, and she recognized you." "It might be dangerous. If she really knows me from some hospital, she might be working for my wife. Or she might be on our side," argued the girl. "She took care of the baby when he was sick. Bad people don't do that." It was a huge risk, but they were out of options. The handsome man looked at the 3 babies sleeping peacefully, their innocent faces lit by the faint light that filtered through the cracks in the bridge. He didn't know who he was, didn't remember his previous life, had no money or resources, but he knew one thing for sure. He would do anything to protect those children. "Tomorrow we'll look for the nurse," he decided, "and pray that she is really an ally." What none of them knew was that a few blocks away, the blonde woman was in a very different meeting, planning the final move of a game that had started long before any of them were born. And that move would involve not only the capture of the handsome man and the babies, but also the elimination of any witness who could complicate her future plans. including a brave 4-year-old girl who knew too much. Finding the nurse proved more difficult than anyone had imagined. The girl spent 3 days visiting health posts and small clinics around the city, always making up excuses about a sick little brother, but without success. The woman who had helped them seemed to have disappeared completely, as if she had never existed. It was on the 4th day that luck changed, but in a way that none of them expected. The handsome man was alone with the babies when he heard footsteps approaching the bridge. His heart raced, expecting to see the blonde woman or men in suits coming to get them. Instead, it was the nurse who appeared, carrying a medical bag and an expression of determination on her face. "I knew you would still be here," she said, looking around the improvised gap. "I've been thinking about you every day since I was here. How did you find us?" he asked, instinctively positioning himself between her and the babies. "It wasn't difficult. A little girl looking for a nurse who took care of babies under a bridge. News spreads fast among healthcare professionals." She knelt down and placed the bag on the floor. "Besides, I needed to talk to you about something important." "About what?" The nurse looked directly into his eyes, and he saw something there that made him feel a chill down his spine. "About who you really are, and about the danger you're in." At that moment the girl arrived running, breathless from the run. She stopped abruptly upon seeing the nurse, her small body tensing like an animal ready to flee. "It's okay," said the handsome man. "She came to help us." The nurse looked at the girl with a gentle expression. "You're very brave for taking care of them all, but now I need you to listen to me very carefully because your lives depend on it." She opened the bag and, instead of medications, took out a folder with documents. "My name is Bethany, and I worked at St. Clair's Hospital for 5 years. I was on duty the night your children were born." The handsome man felt his legs weaken. "My children? Then You are Grayson Bennett, heir to one of the largest fortunes in stocks and investments in this city. Your net worth exceeds $100 million, including applications in bitcoins and international funds." Bethany paused, watching his reaction. "And your wife, Valerie, planned your demise since the day you were married." The third major twist exploded in Grayson's mind like a bomb. Fragments of memory began to come together with painful clarity. He remembered signing marriage papers, changing wills, discussions about children that he thought were just hypothetical conversations about the future. "She married me for the money," he murmured, the reality forming like a terrible picture. "Worse than that," said Bethany, her voice filled with sadness. "The babies aren't even hers. She hired a surrogate, forced me to participate in the scheme under threats of destroying my career. The idea was to have the children registered as legitimate children of the two of you, ensuring that she had the right to the full inheritance if something happened to you." The girl listened to everything in silence, her large eyes trying to process information that was too complex for her age, but that she understood instinctively as being dangerous. "But something went wrong with her plan," continued Bethany. "When the babies were born, you insisted on taking them home immediately, said you wanted to be a present father from day one. Valerie panicked because her plan depended on you not forming real bonds with the children. So she arranged the accident," Grayson completed, the memories returning like a painful avalanche. "She hired men to simulate a kidnapping. The idea was that you would be found injured, but alive a few weeks later, with a story about having been attacked by kidnappers who took the babies. That would give her time to pretend that the children were lost forever, keeping all the inheritance without having to worry about dependents. But I escaped with the babies," Grayson remembered, fragments of the desperate escape becoming clear. "You fought against the men who were going to get you, managed to get out of the hospital with the 3 children. But you took a hit on the head during the confusion, which caused the temporary amnesia." Bethany looked at the girl. "It was lucky you found someone willing to take care of you all." The fourth major twist came when Bethany revealed what had happened in recent days. "Valerie is getting desperate. She spread the story that you had a psychotic episode and kidnapped the children, managed to get a provisional court order giving her temporary custody of the babies and emergency control over your assets. How is that possible? Asked Grayson, the indignation growing in his voice. She has powerful allies, judges who received generous donations to their campaigns, doctors who signed false psychiatric reports based on testimony from bribed employees. Bethany sighed. Your own lawyer is working for her now. The girl finally spoke, her voice small but determined. Then we need to prove that she's lying. Exactly, said Bethany, smiling at the child, and that's why I'm here. I have evidence, recordings of the conversations where Valerie planned everything, documents about the payments she made, even evidence about the true biological mother of the babies. She opened another folder, revealing photographs, contracts, and electronic devices. But there's a problem. Valerie found out that I have this evidence. Last night, men broke into my house looking for these documents. You're in danger because of us, said Grayson, guilt weighing in his voice. We're all in danger, corrected Bethany. But we have an advantage she doesn't expect. Which? She thinks you're still without memory, that you're just a confused man with 3 babies. Doesn't imagine that you already know who you are and what her game is. Bethany stood up, determination shining in her eyes. It's time to counterattack. They spent the next hours elaborating a plan. Bethany explained that she had contacts in other cities, healthcare professionals who could testify about the irregularities in the birth of the babies. She also had a trusted lawyer who wasn't on Valerie's payroll. But first, you need to leave this city, she said. Valerie will intensify the searches now that she knows you have survived for so long. Where can we go? Asked the girl, the concern clear in her voice. That city, as hostile as it was the only home she knew. I have a cousin who lives in a small town 3 hours from here, replied Bethany. She has an isolated farm where you can stay safe while we organize the evidence. Grayson looked at the 3 babies, who slept peacefully, oblivious to the chaos around them, then at the girl who had become his salvation and protection. The decision was risky, leaving the little security they had built under the bridge for a promise of help from a stranger. How do we know we can trust you? He asked. Bethany looked directly into his eyes. Because I could have handed you over to Valerie from day one and received a fortune for it. Instead, I'm here, risking my own life to help you. It was a simple but convincing logic. The girl approached Grayson and whispered, She took care of the baby when he was sick. Bad people don't do that. That night they prepared to leave the bridge that had been their home for almost a month. Bethany had brought proper supplies for the babies and clean clothes for everyone. For the first time in weeks, Grayson saw himself in the reflection of a puddle wearing clothes that weren't rags. You look different, commented the girl, watching him. I feel different, he admitted, as if I'm remembering who I really am. But along with the memory came also the weight of responsibility. He was no longer just a man with no past taking care of abandoned babies. He was Grayson Bennett, a millionaire with powerful enemies, a fortune at risk, and a wife who wouldn't hesitate to destroy anyone who got between her and the money she coveted. When they left the bridge in the following dawn, none of them looked back. They didn't know that, a few hours later, men in black suits would arrive at the place with specific orders not to leave any witnesses alive. The war had officially begun. The trip to Bethany's cousin's farm turned into a journey of painful discoveries. During the 3 hours in the borrowed car, Grayson managed to access increasingly clear fragments of his memory, and what was revealed was a past that he almost preferred to continue forgetting. He remembered now his company, Bennett Industries, an empire built on smart investments and a family inheritance that went back 3 generations. His assets included not only liquid cash, but valuable properties, shares in multinational corporations, investments in cryptocurrencies that had appreciated exponentially, and investment funds that generated monthly dividends higher than what most people earned in a year. I was so naive, he murmured, watching the rural landscape through the window. Valerie appeared in my life exactly when I was most vulnerable, right after my father passed away. She knew exactly what to say, how to act. Bethany, who was driving while the girl slept in the back seat with the babies, shook her head sadly. She studied you for months before approaching you, knew about your loneliness, about your desires to have a family, about every weakness she could exploit. How do you know so much about this? Because she hired me to be part of the plan from the beginning. When she discovered that you wanted children, she realized she could use that to her advantage. Bethany paused, clearly struggling with guilt. She approached me at the hospital, offered an absurd amount of money for me to participate in the surrogate scheme, and then falsify the documents to make it seem like she had given birth to the babies. Grayson felt a wave of nausea. You accepted the money? In the beginning, yes, admitted Bethany, tears running down her face. My mother was sick, needing expensive treatment. I thought it would just be falsifying some papers that no one would really get hurt. She wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. I didn't imagine she planned to eliminate you afterwards. Bethany's cousin's farm was located in the middle of extensive fields, far from main roads and curious neighbors. The house was simple but welcoming, with a large yard where chickens pecked freely and a well-tended vegetable garden. More importantly, it was isolated enough that they could hide without being easily found. Marina, Bethany's cousin, was a 50-year-old woman with calloused hands and a genuine smile. She greeted them without asking questions, showing them simple but clean rooms where they could settle in. For the first time in weeks, the babies slept in proper cribs. The girl had a real bed, and Grayson could take a hot shower that made him feel human again. But the peace was illusory. On the second night at the farm, Bethany received a call that changed everything. They found the bridge, she said, hanging up the phone with trembling hands. And there are bodies. Grayson felt his blood run cold. What bodies? 3 homeless people who were sleeping near the place where you were. The police are saying it was a gangland hit, but I know it wasn't. Bethany sat heavily in the kitchen chair. Valerie is eliminating witnesses. Anyone who might have seen you. The girl, who was playing with the babies in the living room, heard the conversation and approached. Did she kill people because of us? Not because of us, said Grayson, pulling her into a protective hug. Because of her evil, we didn't do anything wrong. But the guilt weighed on him like a stone. Innocent people had lost their lives because he had been stupid enough to marry a woman who saw human beings as disposable obstacles in her path to wealth. The next morning, the first major twist arrived through a discovery that Bethany made when reviewing the documents she had hidden. Among the papers, she found something that had gone unnoticed previously. A life insurance policy that Valerie had made Grayson sign shortly before the birth of the babies. Look at this, she said, showing the document. She increased your life insurance to $200 million with her as the sole beneficiary, and it has a specific clause about death by accident or violence. Grayson examined the paper, his expression becoming increasingly grim. I don't even remember signing this. Because you probably signed it along with dozens of other documents, thinking they were routine company papers. Bethany pointed to a specific date. Look when it was signed. 2 days before she started pressuring you about having children. The magnitude of Valerie's plan began to reveal itself in all its cruel complexity. She hadn't married him just to access his current fortune. She had planned even greater enrichment through his elimination, using the babies as justification for her legal claims and the life insurance as an additional source of capital. There's more, said Bethany, turning pages. She made similar contracts with other rich men in the last 5 years. They all had fatal accidents a few months after the wedding. Grayson felt the world spin around him. She's a serial killer? A very intelligent and well-connected serial killer. Each death seemed accidental or the result of common crime. There were never any serious investigations because she always had perfect alibis and inherited everything legally. The girl, who had been silently observing the conversation between the adults, asked a question that cut straight to the heart of the matter. How many families has she destroyed? It was a question that none of them wanted to answer, but that echoed with a terrible truth. Valerie wasn't just a greedy widow, she was a professional predator who had turned murder into a business model. That afternoon, while the babies slept and the girl helped Marina in the vegetable garden, Grayson and Bethany devised a plan to expose Valerie. They had substantial evidence, but needed more than just documents to convince authorities who were probably already under her influence. "We need the real biological mother of the babies," said Bethany. "If we can get her to testify about how she was forced to participate in the scheme, we'll have a living witness who can contradict Valerie's version." "Where is she now?" "Hiding. Valerie threatened her after the babies were born, said that if she ever talked about the agreement, she would suffer the consequences." Bethany hesitated. "But I have her address. I can try to convince her to help us." While they were planning, the second major twist was developing miles away. Valerie had discovered the connection between Bethany and Grayson and was preparing a trap that would involve not only capturing them, but also eliminating any evidence that could incriminate her. On the fourth day at the farm, Marina ran into the house with an expression of panic. "There are black cars coming up the road," she said breathlessly. "3 cars, men in suits. They're not from around here." Grayson felt his heart race. "How much time do we have?" 5 minutes, maybe less." The escape was desperate and chaotic. Bethany grabbed the most important documents. Grayson carried 2 babies, the girl held the third, and they all ran through the back door towards the barn. Marina led them through an underground tunnel that connected the barn to an abandoned shed on the other side of the property, a secret passage that had been built decades ago during times of political persecution. From the hiding place they could hear the men ransacking the house, shouting questions to Marina, threatening her when she insisted that she knew nothing about fugitives. The sound of furniture being broken and objects being destroyed echoed through the thin walls of the shed. "They're going to hurt her because of us," whispered the girl, tears running down her face. "Marina is smarter than she seems," reassured Bethany. "She's survived worse things than some men in suits." They stayed hidden for 6 hours, the babies miraculously sleeping during most of the time. When the cars finally left, Marina came looking for them, limping slightly but smiling. "They're gone," she said, "but they said they would be back." "You can't stay here." The third major twist came when Bethany called her source at the hospital and discovered that Valerie had given an emotional interview on television that afternoon, crying convincing tears while begging for the safe return of her husband and children. "She's saying you had a complete nervous breakdown after the loss of your father," reported Bethany after watching the recording online. "That you kidnapped the babies in a desperate attempt to leave the country and start a new life, that she only wants her family back, safe and sound." The performance was so convincing that even Grayson felt momentarily disturbed. Valerie cried at the right time, hesitated at the right words, conveyed exactly the type of vulnerability and despair that would touch the hearts of the public. "She's gaining popular sympathy," continued Bethany. "Social media is full of people offering help to find you. Some groups have already started voluntary searches." It was a master stroke. Valerie had turned public opinion against them, posing as a victim while mobilizing hundreds of ordinary people to help in her hunt. Now it wasn't just men in suits who were looking for them, but well-intentioned citizens who believed they were helping to reunite a broken family. That night, as they prepared to leave the farm and look for a new hiding place, Grayson looked at the girl who had saved his life and the lives of his children. She was singing softly to the babies, the same melody she had sung that first terrible night under the bridge. "I'm sorry for putting you in danger," he said. "You didn't put me in danger," she replied without stopping singing. "You gave me a family. "And I'm going to protect my family no matter what happens." Her words carried a determination that broke his heart and at the same time gave Grayson the strength he needed to continue fighting. They would face whatever came ahead together, as the improbable but genuine family they had become. The escape from the farm took them to a small industrial town where Bethany knew a trusted mechanic who allowed them to hide in the storage area of his workshop. The place smelled of oil and metal, but it had the advantage of being located in an area where cars going in and out wouldn't attract attention. More importantly, the mechanic, a silent man named Danny, didn't ask questions and accepted the payment that Bethany offered without questioning the strange situation. During the first 3 days in the hiding place, Grayson struggled against a deep depression that threatened to consume him completely. The magnitude of what Valerie had done, not only to him, but to other innocent men, weighed on him like a mountain of guilt and despair. He saw himself as a fool who had facilitated the plans of a murderer, putting not only his own life at risk, but also the lives of the babies and the brave girl who had become his salvation. "I should have realized," he murmured to Bethany while watching the girl playing with the babies among disassembled car parts. All the signs were there. The rush to get married, the insistence on children, the changes in the will. "She's a professional at this," replied Bethany, organizing the documents they had managed to save. "You're not the first smart and successful man she's completely deceived." But the words of consolation didn't diminish the weight of responsibility that Grayson felt. Every time he looked at the 3 babies, he saw not only his children, but also the future victims that Valerie would continue to make if she wasn't stopped. Every time he saw the girl trying to entertain the children with improvised games, he remembered that she had lost her childhood to protect people she barely knew. On the 4th day, Bethany managed to make contact with the biological mother of the babies. The call was tense and full of fear, but it finally resulted in a meeting scheduled for the following night at an abandoned gas station on the outskirts of the town. "She's terrified," said Bethany after hanging up. "Valerie sent men to threaten her twice since the babies were born. She knows that if she says anything, she could end up like the other people who crossed your wife's path." "Other people? Remember the previous husbands who had accidents?" "Not all of them died immediately. Some survived long enough to start asking inconvenient questions." Bethany paused, her expression becoming even darker. "They all had second accidents, always fatal." The revelation was like a punch to Grayson's stomach. Valerie didn't just kill for money. She was meticulous in eliminating any threat to her freedom, however small it might be. The next day, the girl made an observation that completely changed everyone's perspective on the situation. She was playing with the baby, who had the moon-shaped birthmark, when she commented casually, "He looks like the woman in the picture." Grayson frowned. "What picture?" "The one you keep in your pocket, the pregnant woman." Grayson took out the crumpled photograph he had found in his coat on the first day. He looked at it again, then at the baby, and felt as if the world had stopped spinning. The delicate features, the shape of the eyes, even the birthmark that appeared partially in the photo, everything matched perfectly. "Bethany," he called, his voice trembling. "Look at this." Bethany examined the photograph and the baby, her hands shaking as she made the comparison. "Oh my God," she whispered. "This is Caroline, the biological mother. How did you have her picture?" "It was in my pocket when I woke up in the alley. I have no idea how it got there." The discovery opened a new dimension in the mystery. If Grayson had a photograph of the true mother of the babies, it meant that he knew about Valerie's scheme before the accident. Maybe he was even investigating or trying to expose his wife when he was attacked. "You need to try to remember," insisted Bethany. "Anything about how you got that picture, about what you were doing before the accident." Grayson closed his eyes and concentrated, forcing his mind to search the fragmented memories. Gradually, images began to form. Himself hiring a private investigator, receiving reports about suspicious activities of Valerie, discovering about other marriages that had ended in tragedy. "I was investigating her," he murmured, the memory becoming clearer. "I had hired a detective to investigate her past because some things didn't make sense about our pregnancy." "What kind of things?" "She never wanted me to go to the doctor's appointments. Always had excuses to go alone. And when I insisted, she would get furious, say that I didn't trust her." Grayson rubbed his temples, trying to extract more details. The investigator discovered that she had used false names in other marriages, that there was a pattern of rich men dying soon after changing wills in her favor. Bethany stood up abruptly. "Where are the investigator's reports?" "I don't know. I remember reading the documents in my office at home when Valerie arrived. There was a terrible argument. She was screaming that I was being paranoid, that I was destroying our marriage because of unfounded suspicions. And then? Then, nothing. The next thing I remember is waking up in that alley with you beside me," said he, looking at the girl who was humming to the babies. That night, the meeting with Caroline was revealing in ways that none of them expected. The 23-year-old arrived at the abandoned gas station looking like a cornered animal, constantly looking over her shoulder as if expecting armed men to appear at any moment. "I shouldn't be here," were her first words. "If she finds out I talked to you—" "No one will find out," promised Bethany. "But we need your help to stop Valerie before she hurts more people." Caroline told a story that confirmed everyone's worst fears. Valerie had approached her when she was desperate, offering an amount that would change her life in exchange for being a surrogate mother. The contract seemed legitimate, but as the pregnancy progressed, it became clear that there was something sinister behind everything. "She made me take strange medications," said Caroline, her hands trembling. "Said they were vitamins, but they left me confused with my memory scrambled. And there were always men watching the doctor's appointments, men that she said were lawyers but looked more like henchmen." "Did you sign any documents about custody of the babies?" asked Grayson. "Many, but I was always dizzy because of the medications. I couldn't read properly." "She said it was just normal bureaucracy." Caroline began to cry. "When the babies were born, she said that I could never see them again, that if I tried to contact them, I would be accused of kidnapping." Valerie's plan was even more elaborate than they had imagined. She had not only forged a pregnancy, but had drugged Caroline to ensure that she could not legally contest custody of the children later. "There's one thing you need to know," said Caroline before leaving. "Valerie isn't working alone. She has a partner, someone who helps her identify targets and arrange the accidents." "Who?" "I don't know his real name, but he's a doctor. He was the one who prescribed the medications that left me confused, and he was the one who suggested that your accident looked like a kidnapping followed by a head trauma. The revelation that there was a medical accomplice involved in the scheme changed everything. This explained how Valerie got false psychiatric reports so easily, how the accidents of her previous husbands had been so convincing, and how she knew exactly what kind of injury to cause in Grayson to produce temporary amnesia without resulting in permanent paralysis. When they returned to the workshop, they found Danny waiting for them with a worried expression. "You were on television again," he said. The blonde woman made another emotional appeal. This time, she was offering a reward of $1 million for information that leads to the safe return of the family. $1 million was enough money to tempt anyone in town. Bethany knew they couldn't stay at the workshop for much longer. Some curious neighbor or ambitious employee would inevitably recognize them and make the connection. "We have to get out of this town tonight," she said, "and we have to find a way to contact that investigator that Grayson hired. If he's still alive and has copies of the reports, it could be our only chance to gather enough evidence to expose Valerie." But while they were planning their next move, Valerie was executing hers. That same night, she would appear personally on television to make an announcement that would transform the search for them into a national obsession. And this time, she wouldn't just be begging for the return of her family. She would be revealing specific details about Grayson's deteriorating mental state, painting him as a dangerous man who posed a threat not only to his own children, but to anyone who tried to help him. The hunt would become a matter of public safety, and there would be no place on earth where they could hide. Valerie's interview on national television changed everything overnight. Grayson watched horrified as his wife, wearing dark clothes and holding a handkerchief in her trembling hands, painted a picture of him as a dangerous and unstable man who had kidnapped his own children during a psychotic break. "He started having delusions after the passing of his father," she said, tears running down her perfectly made-up face. "He believed that I was trying to poison the babies, that there was a conspiracy against our family. The doctor said that he needed hospitalization, but he refused to accept treatment." The performance was masterful. Valerie showed supposed threatening text messages that Grayson had sent, false medical reports attesting to his deteriorated mental state, and even audio recordings where a voice that supposedly was his threatened to harm the babies if she tried to take them away from him. "I'm desperate," she continued. "I don't care about the money, the possessions, none of it. I just want my kids back safe and sound, and I want my husband to get the help he needs." Bethany slammed the TV off. "She's playing it very smart. She's not just asking for you to be found anymore. She's asking for Danny to be caught and the babies to be rescued." The girl, who had watched everything in silence, asked a simple but devastating question. "Are people going to believe her?" "They will," Danny replied bitterly, "because she's saying exactly what they want to hear. A suffering woman trying to save her children from a crazy husband." Overnight, the situation deteriorated rapidly. Danny arrived, rushing into the warehouse with alarming news. Volunteer groups were organizing to search for them. Makeshift checkpoints were being set up on major roads, and the reward had increased to $5 million. "The whole city's turned into an anthill," he said. "Everyone's looking for you. You better get out now." They gathered their few possessions and left at dawn, traveling on back roads that Bethany knew from her trips to and from rural hospitals. Their destination was an abandoned medical clinic 60 miles away, where she had worked years ago and where she knew they could hide for a few days. During the drive, Danny made a decision that would change everything. "We need to stop running," he said. "As long as we keep running, Valerie controls the narrative. It's time to fight back." "How?" Bethany asked. "She has the media, the cops, public opinion. We only have some documents and the testimony of a terrified surrogate." "We have more than that," Danny said, looking at the girl who was sleeping with one of the babies. "We have the truth, and we have a witness Valerie never expected to exist." He was referring to the girl. All the time they had spent together, she had observed and absorbed every detail of his recovery, every fragment of memory that returned, every inconsistency in the story Valerie was telling. More importantly, she had been present at the exact moment he was found, wounded and confused, with 3 babies who clearly weren't abandoned by choice. "A 4-year-old won't convince anyone," Bethany said. "Not just any 4-year-old, Danny corrected, but a child whose story can be verified, who has details only a real witness would know." The abandoned clinic was in the middle of a rural area ravaged by drought. The building had been abandoned for 2 decades, with broken windows and weeds growing through the cracks in the walls, but the structure was still solid. More importantly, it had a working generator and water from an artesian well. They settled into what had been the emergency room, using abandoned medical equipment to create a more suitable environment for the babies. The girl explored the building curiously, finding old medical books that she browsed, even though she couldn't read. On the second day at the clinic, Bethany managed to contact the private investigator Danny had hired. The conversation was brief, but revealing. "He's alive," she said after hanging up, "but he's in hiding. Valerie sent men after him too, burned down his office and threatened his family. Does he still have copies of the reports?" "He does, And he said, "There's a lot more than you knew. Valerie didn't just kill 5 husbands, it was at least 9 in the last 10 years. She has a whole network of accomplices, including lawyers, doctors, and even a judge." The magnitude of Valerie's criminal operation was impressive. She had turned murder into a highly organized and profitable business, accumulating not only inheritances, but also life insurance, properties, and shares in the victims' companies. "The investigator wants to meet with us," Bethany continued, "but only if we guarantee they can leave the country afterward. He knows if he stays here, Valerie will eventually find him." As they planned the meeting, the girl made a disturbing discovery in the clinic's basement. Among rusty medical equipment, she found old documents showing that the clinic had been closed after a scandal involving illegal experiments on patients. "Look at this," she said, showing a yellowed folder to Danny. "The bad woman's name is here." Danny examined the papers and felt his blood run cold. Valerie had worked at the clinic years ago as a nurse during the period when the illegal experiments were happening. Even more disturbing, there were records of patients who had lost their lives in ways that investigators at the time considered suspicious. "She's been doing this much longer than we thought," he murmured. "And she always knew exactly how to kill without leaving obvious evidence." On the 3rd day, the meeting with the investigator was scheduled for a secluded road near the state line. But when they arrived at the location, they found only the wreckage of a burned-out car and signs that something terrible had happened. Bethany recognized the remains of the vehicle as belonging to the investigator. There were no bodies, but there was enough blood at the scene to indicate that no one had left there alive. "She found him first," Danny said, a mixture of anger and despair growing in his voice. "How many more people are going to lose their lives because of my stupidity?" The girl approached him and took his hand. "It wasn't your fault. Bad people do bad things. We can only try to stop them." Her simple words carried a wisdom that cut through Danny's despair. The girl was right. They couldn't blame themselves for Valerie's actions, but they had a responsibility to try to stop her. That night, while the babies slept and Bethany stood guard, Danny and the girl talked about what they would do next. Options were running out quickly, and it was becoming increasingly clear that a direct confrontation was inevitable. "Are you scared?" he asked. "I am," she admitted, "but I'm more scared of letting the bad woman hurt other families. If anything happens to me, I want you to promise you'll take care of the babies." The girl shook her head firmly. "Nothing's going to happen. We're going to stay together, all of us. That's how families work." Her words gave Danny the courage he needed to make the riskiest decision of his life. Instead of continuing to run, they would go directly to the city, to Valerie's own territory. It was time to use the only advantage they had. Valerie didn't know that Danny had fully recovered his memory. She still believed she was dealing with a confused and unstable man, and that underestimation would be her downfall. The return to the city was planned with the precision of a military operation. Bethany managed to contact an investigative journalist who had been quietly questioning some of the official versions of the deaths of Valerie's husbands. The journalist, named Rita, agreed to meet with them in exchange for exclusive access to the full story. "It's risky," Bethany said as they drove through the outer streets of the sprawling metropolis. "If she decides to turn us in instead of helping us." "She won't," Danny replied, watching the city lights appear on the horizon. "I read her articles. She has suspected something wrong with Valerie's husband's departures for months." The girl, sitting in the back seat with the babies, had been strangely quiet throughout the trip. Danny realized that she was scared, not just by the danger, but by returning to the city where she had spent so much suffering alone. "You don't have to get out of the car during the meeting," he said to her. "You can stay hidden with the babies." "No," she replied with determination. "If I'm going to testify about what I saw, I need to talk to the woman who's going to tell our story." The meeting was scheduled for a public hospital parking lot where journalists coming and going wouldn't attract attention. Rita arrived on time, a woman in her 40s with sharp eyes and a recorder always at hand. "You know the whole city is looking for you," were her first words. "There are cops on every corner, photos of you on every pole." "We know," Danny said. "That's why we need our version to be told before Valerie finds us." Rita listened to the whole story, asking specific questions and verifying details. When Bethany showed her the documents about the other husbands and the evidence of the surrogate scheme, the journalist's eyes lit up with the excitement of someone who had found the story of the century. "This is explosive," she said. "But you understand that the moment I publish, Valerie will know exactly where you are. She will come with everything." "We're counting on it," Danny replied. The girl approached Rita and looked directly into her eyes. "Are you going to help the other families that the bad woman hurt?" "I'll try," Rita promised, touched by the child's sincerity. "Then you can tell our story," the girl said, "even if it's dangerous." While Rita prepared the story that would be published the next day, they hid in a cheap motel on the outskirts, registering with fake documents that Bethany had obtained. It was a dirty and noisy place, but it had the advantage of being exactly the type of place where no one asked questions. During the night, Danny had an honest conversation with the girl about what was to come. "When the story is published tomorrow, Valerie is going to be desperate. Desperate people do dangerous things. Is she going to try to hurt us?" "She'll try," he admitted. "But this time, we're prepared. And this time, we're not alone." Bethany had used her medical contacts to organize a support network. Nurses and doctors who doubted the official stories about the deaths of Valerie's husbands were ready to testify. Carolina, the biological mother of the babies, had agreed to come out of hiding to speak publicly. Rita's story was published the next morning with a headline that stopped the city: "The Black Widow, How a Nurse Became a Millionaire Serial Killer." The article detailed not only Danny's case, but Valerie's entire operation over a decade. The reaction was immediate and explosive. Within hours, protesters gathered in front of Valerie's mansion, demanding answers. Other wealthy husbands in the city began to question their own marriages. Authorities who had supported Valerie rushed to distance themselves from her publicly. But Valerie wasn't willing to accept defeat. In the late afternoon, she gave a press conference where she presented herself as the victim of a defamatory campaign orchestrated by her unstable husband and his accomplices. "These accusations are absurd," she said, tears of indignation streaming down her face. "My husband is clearly having a complete mental breakdown and is trying to destroy me to cover up what he did to our children." It was a risky but calculated move. Valerie knew that part of the population still sympathized with her original version of the story, and she was counting on that sympathy to survive the scandal. The turning point came when Carolina appeared on television that same night. Trembling but determined, she told her full story, showing documents proving that she had been forced to participate in Valerie's scheme. "She drugged me throughout the pregnancy," Carolina said, her voice breaking with emotion. "She made me sign papers I couldn't read properly, and when I tried to question anything, she threatened me with prison." Carolina's testimony destroyed Valerie's last defenses. Public opinion turned completely against her, and authorities who had previously defended her began to open official investigations. But the victory came at a high price. That night, armed men broke into the motel where Danny and the others were hiding. Only Bethany's quickness in realizing the danger and the existence of an emergency exit through the back prevented a tragedy. "She knows where we are," Bethany said as they ran through the dark streets carrying the babies. "She needs to eliminate us before we can testify in court." They took temporary refuge at the home of one of Bethany's medical contacts, but they knew they couldn't stay there for long. Valerie had enough resources and connections to find them anywhere in the city. "We have to finish this today," Danny said. "We can't keep running forever." "How?" "By giving her exactly what she wants. A final confrontation. The girl, who had been quiet throughout the escape, finally spoke. "If we're going to face the bad woman, I need to tell you something important." "What?" "I remember more things about the night I found you. Things I didn't tell you before because I was scared." Danny knelt down in front of her. "What things?" "I saw the bad woman there. She was talking to the men who hurt you. She was giving them money." The girl paused, gathering courage. "And she saw you escape with the babies. She knew you were alive from day one." The revelation changed everything. If Valerie knew from the beginning that Danny had survived, it meant that the whole performance about looking for the missing husband had been an elaborate charade. She wasn't trying to find him to reunite. She was trying to find him to finish the job her henchman had failed to complete. "Why didn't you tell me this before?" Danny asked. "Because I was afraid you would get more scared and stop fighting," the girl admitted. "But now that we're going to face her, you need to know that she always knew we were going to survive, and she always had a plan for when she found us." That night, Danny made the most courageous and dangerous decision of his life. Instead of continuing to hide, he would call Valerie directly and arrange a meeting. A final confrontation where only one of them would walk away alive. It was time for the truth. The call to Valerie was made from a public phone in downtown, with Bethany and the girl waiting in the car at a safe distance. Danny took a deep breath before dialing the number he knew by heart, preparing to hear again the voice of the woman who had destroyed so many lives. "Danny?" Valerie's voice sounded surprised, but he could detect a note of ill-disguised triumph. "My dear, finally! I'm so worried." "Cut the act!" he interrupted, his voice ice-cold. "I know exactly who you are and what you've done." There was a long silence on the other end of the line. When Valerie spoke again, all pretense of a worried wife had disappeared. "So your memory came back completely. What a pity. It complicates things. You killed 9 men, Valerie, 9 families destroyed by your greed." "They were stupid men who deserved what happened," she replied coldly. "Just as you deserve what's about to happen." "I want to make a deal," Valerie laughed, a humorless sound. "You're not in a position to negotiate anything." "Yes, I am. I have something you want more than anything in the world. The babies. The babies. And I'm willing to hand them over to you in exchange for my life and the lives of the people who helped me." It was a complete lie. But Danny knew Valerie would bite the bait. She needed the children to validate her claims to the inheritance, and she couldn't simply kill them because that would raise too many suspicions. "Where do you want to meet?" she asked after a calculated pause. "At the warehouse of the old textile factory in the industrial zone. Midnight. You come alone, I come alone." "And the children?" "They'll be with me. But if you bring anyone, if there's any sign of betrayal, they disappear forever." Danny hung up before she could answer. His hands were shaking not from fear, but from contained anger. In a few hours, he would finally face the woman who had turned his life into a nightmare. When he returned to the car, Bethany and the girl were waiting for him with tense expressions. "Did she accept?" Bethany asked. "She did, but obviously she's not going to come alone." "Then why did you set up the meeting?" "Because this time we'll have the advantage of preparation. And because Rita will be there with hidden cameras to record everything." The plan was risky but simple. Rita and her team would arrive at the warehouse before them and install recording equipment in strategic locations. Danny would enter the warehouse with the babies, confront Valerie, and try to get her to confess to her crimes while everything was being recorded. "What if she tries to kill you on the spot?" asked the girl, her small voice full of concern. "Then at least we'll have recordings of her confessions to make sure she's arrested," Danny replied, kneeling down to be at the child's height. "But nothing's going to happen to me. I promise." It was a promise he wasn't sure he could keep, but he saw the relief in the girl's eyes and knew he had done the right thing. The girl had repeatedly proven that she would do anything to protect the makeshift family they had formed. The hours until midnight passed slowly. They settled into a motel near the warehouse where Bethany took care of the babies while Danny reviewed every detail of the plan. The girl insisted on helping, checking the portable recording equipment that Rita had provided. "You're not going into the warehouse," Danny said firmly. "It's too dangerous." "I know," she replied, "but I'm going to stay close. If something goes wrong, someone needs to take care of the babies." It was a huge responsibility for a 4-year-old, but Danny knew she was the only person he could trust completely. At 11:30, they left for the warehouse. Rita and her team were already on site, hidden in strategic positions with cameras and microphones. Bethany stayed in the car with the girl and the babies 2 blocks away, ready to flee if something went wrong. The abandoned warehouse was a skeleton of concrete and rusty metal, with broken windows that let the moon illuminate the empty interior. Danny entered carrying a bag that supposedly contained supplies for the babies, but which was actually full of fake documents to make Valerie believe he really planned to hand over the children. Valerie arrived promptly at midnight, but as Danny expected, she wasn't alone. 2 men in suits accompanied her, clearly armed and positioned to block any attempt to escape. "Where are my children?" were her first words. "Safe," Danny replied, keeping his distance. "Where they can't be hurt by you." "By me." "Danny, you're clearly having another psychotic episode. I'm their mother." "You're no one's mother. Carolina is the biological mother, and you forced her to participate in your scheme." Valerie laughed. "Carolina was a junkie desperate for money. She would have done anything for what I paid." It was exactly the kind of confession Danny hoped to provoke. The hidden cameras were recording every word, every expression of calculated coldness on Valerie's face. "Just like you did with the other men you killed," Danny continued. "Like you did with Robert Silva, with Marcelo Andrade, with—" "Enough!" Valerie interrupted, her mask of control finally slipping. "They were weak, pathetic. They deserved what happened. Just like you do. So you admit you killed them? I admit that the world was better off without them, and it will be better off without you too." Valerie signaled to the armed men, who began to approach Danny. But at that moment, the warehouse lights turned on and voices shouted, "Police!" from various directions. Rita had kept her word. In addition to recording everything, she had coordinated with authorities who weren't on Valerie's payroll to organize a simultaneous arrest operation. What followed was a chaos of screams, running, and sirens. Valerie's men tried to resist, but they were quickly overpowered. Valerie tried to flee, but she was surrounded before she could reach the exit. "This isn't going to do you any good," she shouted as she was handcuffed. "I have lawyers, I have judges, I have connections you can't even imagine." "Had," Danny corrected, but recorded confessions tend to make even the most loyal allies change sides. As Valerie was led away by the police, Danny rushed out of the warehouse to reunite with Bethany, the girl and the babies. When he got to the car, he found the girl crying tears of relief in Bethany's arms. "Is it over?" she asked when she saw him. "It's over," he confirmed, hugging the whole family. "It's finally over." But even as they celebrated their victory, Danny knew there was still a lot of work ahead. Valerie had a network of accomplices who needed to be identified and arrested. There would be trials, investigations, and a long time until they could truly feel safe. Still, for the first time in months, Danny felt he could breathe freely. The woman who had destroyed so many lives would finally face justice. And he had a family, not the traditional family he had imagined, but a family based on genuine love and mutual sacrifice. As they drove through the city toward an uncertain but hopeful future, the girl asked a question that made him smile. "Now, can we have a real house?" "We can," Danny promised. "A house where no one will ever hurt us again." The 3 months following Valerie's arrest brought a series of revelations that shook the entire city. Police investigations uncovered a network of corruption that extended far beyond what anyone had imagined, involving judges, doctors, lawyers, and even county clerks who forged documents. Danny found himself at the center of a judicial storm, giving depositions almost daily, as prosecutors built cases against each member of Valerie's criminal organization. His fortune, which had been frozen during the period when he was considered a fugitive, was gradually released as his innocence became indisputable. Bethany managed to get her job back at the hospital and was promoted to supervisor of the pediatrics department, a position that allowed her to ensure that cases like hers were identified before children were harmed. Carolina, the biological mother of the babies, entered a witness protection program and began therapy to deal with the trauma of what she had experienced. The girl, throughout this period, remained by Danny's side as a constant force of stability. She cared for the babies with maternal dedication, learned to read with impressive speed, and slowly began to smile more often. But Danny noticed that something still bothered her deeply. "You're worried about something," he said one afternoon, as he watched her play with the babies in the yard of the temporary house where they were living. "I'm thinking about Carolina," she admitted, not stopping from stacking colorful blocks to entertain the children. "She's the real mother of the babies. What if she wants them back?" It was a concern that Danny also carried, but had avoided discussing. Legally, Carolina had rights over the children that Danny couldn't contest. Emotionally, however, the babies had become his children in a way that transcended biology. "If she wants them, we'll respect that," he said finally. "But I think she understands that you've become a family. What about me? If she takes the babies, where will I go?" The question broke Danny's heart. The girl had sacrificed everything to protect them, had become an older sister to the babies in a way that was genuine and profound. The idea of losing her was unthinkable. "You stay with me," he said without hesitation, "forever. No matter what happens with the babies, you're my daughter now." The smile that lit up the girl's face was the most beautiful answer he could have received. 2 weeks later, the situation resolved itself in a way that no one had anticipated. Carolina asked to meet with Danny and the girl, and the conversation they had changed everything for the better. "You saved my children," she said, tears streaming down her face as she watched the babies playing on the living room rug. "Not just physically, but you protected them from a terrible life with Valerie." "They're your children," Danny replied. "If you want to raise them." "I want them to have the best life possible," Carolina interrupted, "and that life is with you. You are their family now." Carolina proposed a shared custody arrangement that would allow Danny and the girl to continue raising the babies while she maintained visitation rights and participation in important decisions. It was a solution that recognized both the biological bonds and the emotional bonds that had been formed. "There's one condition," Carolina said, looking directly at the girl. "I want you to be officially their big sister. On the documents, in the family, in everything." The girl was speechless for a moment, then ran to hug Carolina with a force that surprised everyone present. With the children's situation resolved, Danny could finally focus on rebuilding his life and his company. He discovered that during his absence, loyal employees had kept the Bennett Group running, protecting his investments and even expanding some operations. His applications in cryptocurrencies had appreciated significantly, and his investment funds continued to generate robust dividends. But the experience of living on the streets had completely changed his perspective on wealth and success. Danny decided to use part of his fortune to create a foundation dedicated to helping children in homeless situations, especially those who had lost parents and were living alone. "I don't want any child to go through what you went through," he said to the girl as they signed the papers for the foundation. "I want them to have safe shelters, education, medical care, and families," she added. "Children need families who love them." The foundation grew rapidly, attracting donations from other business owners who had been touched by the story of Danny and the girl. Bethany became medical director of the organization. Carolina worked as an advisor for problematic maternity issues, and even Rita the journalist, joined the team as communications coordinator. 6 months after Valerie's arrest, Danny made the decision to move to a larger house where he could properly accommodate his expanded family and have space to receive the children assisted by the foundation. The girl actively participated in choosing the house, insisting that it have a large garden where the babies could play safely. The house they chose was in a quiet neighborhood with 3 bedrooms for the children, an office for Danny to work from home, and a spacious living room where they could receive visitors. But what most delighted the girl was the library, where Danny promised to fill with books for her to continue learning. "Is it our real house?" she asked on moving day, watching the furniture being carried in by the movers. "Our real house," Danny confirmed. "Forever." Valerie's trial took place 8 months after her arrest, and it was one of the most followed criminal cases in the city's history. Danny and the girl testified, telling their story from that first terrible night in the alley to the final confrontation in the abandoned warehouse. Valerie was sentenced to life imprisonment without parole for 9 counts of first-degree murder, as well as multiple charges of fraud, extortion, and conspiracy. Her accomplices received sentences ranging from 10 to 30 years in prison. During the trial, more families of Valerie's previous victims came forward, and Danny made sure that they all received financial and psychological support through his foundation. It was a small way to honor the memory of the men who hadn't been lucky enough to survive their ex-wife's murderous plans. On the day the sentence was read, Danny felt no satisfaction or revenge, only a deep relief that Valerie could never hurt anyone again. The girl, who had insisted on being present in court to see the bad woman punished, only nodded gravely when the judge announced the sentence. "Now other families are safe," she said when they left the courthouse. "Yes," Danny agreed, "and our family too." That night in their new and safe house, Danny watched the girl helping the babies take their first hesitant steps through the garden. The 3 little ones, now a year and a half old, were developing healthily and happily, clearly secure in the loving environment they had found. Bethany had dinner with them, a tradition that had been established on weekends. Carolina visited regularly, maintaining connection with her biological children, but completely respecting the family ties they had developed. "You know what impresses me the most?" Bethany said as they watched the children play. "How you managed to turn something so terrible into something so beautiful." Danny looked at the girl, who was now 5 years old and had become a confident and loving child, then at the babies who crawled across the rug, laughing gleefully. "We didn't transform anything," he said. "We just discovered that family has nothing to do with blood or money. It has to do with choosing to love someone unconditionally." And as night fell on their house filled with laughter and love, Danny knew that he had finally found the most valuable wealth of all, a genuine family built on sacrifice, mutual protection, and true love. A year after Valerie's trial, when Danny finally thought that his life had found lasting peace, an unexpected discovery threatened to shake the foundations of his family again. The girl, now 6 years old and attending a private school where she excelled in all subjects, came home one afternoon with a worried expression that Danny had learned to recognize as a sign that something important was happening. "Dad," she said. She had started calling him that naturally a few months ago. "The teacher said she needs to talk to you about something important." The meeting at school the next day revealed something that Danny had never considered. The principal, an experienced woman who had worked with traumatized children for decades, explained that during an activity about family history, the girl had mentioned details about her life before meeting them that didn't match the version that everyone knew. She said that she lived in a house before going to the streets, the principal explained, that she had a grandmother who took care of her after her mother left. But according to her, her grandmother also passed away, and it was only then that she was left alone. Danny felt a chill down his spine. All the time he had known the girl, she had only talked about living alone on the streets after her mother died. She had never mentioned a grandmother or any other relative. "Are you sure she said that?" he asked. "I am. And there's more. She drew the house where she lived with her grandmother with very specific details. A blue house with a rose garden and an iron gate. It's not the kind of detail that a child would invent." That night, Danny had a delicate conversation with the girl about what she had told at school. Initially, she clammed up, refusing to talk about the subject. But when Danny explained that he only wanted to understand her story better, she finally opened up. "I lived with Grandma Maisie after Mom went to heaven," she said, her eyes filling with tears that she tried to contain. "She was good to me, gave me food, and taught me to sing the songs that Mom liked." "What happened to Grandma Maisie?" "She got very sick. Men in suits came and said I had to go to a special place where other children without families stayed. But I was scared, so I ran away." The revelation that the girl had run away from a shelter instead of simply having lost her parents completely changed the legal situation of her adoption. Danny knew that if she had been officially placed under state care, there would be records, people looking for her. Bethany, when informed about the situation, confirmed Danny's worst fears. If she ran away from an official shelter, technically she's still a ward of the state. There may be people looking for her for years. "But she's my daughter now," Danny protested. "It doesn't matter what the papers say. Legally, it matters. If they find out where she is, they may try to take her away from you." The possibility of losing the girl was unbearable for Danny. She had become not only his daughter, but the glue that held the family together. The babies adored her. She took care of everyone with maternal dedication, and her presence had transformed the house into a true home. Determined to resolve the situation before it became a problem, Danny hired an investigator to trace the girl's past and find out what her current legal situation was. What the investigator found was even more complex than they expected. The girl's grandmother, Maisie Johnson, had been her legal guardian after her mother died in an accident. When Maisie developed advanced cancer, she tried to arrange for the care of her granddaughter, but died before she could finalize the legal processes. The girl had been temporarily placed in a shelter while authorities looked for living relatives. "She ran away from the shelter 3 days after arriving there," reported the investigator. "There's an active missing child record, but the case was archived as low priority 2 years ago." "Why low priority?" "Because the shelter was overcrowded. She was just another child without family. And frankly, the system didn't have the resources to search intensively for every child who ran away." It was a cruel reality, but one that benefited Danny's situation. If the case had been archived, there was less chance of someone coming to claim the girl now. Still, Danny decided that the right thing to do would be to regularize the situation legally. He initiated the official adoption process, presenting all the documentation about how he had found the girl and how she had become an integral part of his family. The process wasn't simple. Social workers came to the house to evaluate the environment. The girl was interviewed by psychologists to verify that she was happy and safe, and there were several hearings where Danny had to explain the unusual circumstances that had led to the formation of his family. During one of the hearings, something happened that almost destroyed everything. A middle-aged woman appeared in court claiming to be a distant cousin of the girl and claiming custody rights. The woman, who identified herself as Gladys Miller, said that she had been looking for her niece for years and had only recently discovered where she was through the news stories about Valerie's case. "She belongs with her blood relatives," Gladys argued in court, "not with strangers who found her on the street." Danny felt the world crumble around him. The possibility of losing the girl to a relative who appeared suddenly was his worst nightmare coming true. The girl, who was present at the hearing, was questioned by the judge about her wishes. "Do you know this woman?" he asked, pointing to Gladys. "No," the girl replied clearly. "I've never seen her before." She says she's your cousin. Would you like to live with her? The girl looked at Danny, then at Gladys, then back at the judge. My dad is Danny. My brothers are the babies. My family is who took care of me when I was alone and scared. Her words deeply touched everyone present in the court, but Danny knew that emotion wasn't always enough in legal matters. What saved the situation was a background investigation that Danny's lawyer requested about Gladys Miller. The investigation revealed that she had a history of severe financial problems and had attempted similar custody lawsuits in other states, always seeking children who could qualify her for government benefits. She's a professional child exploiter, the lawyer explained to the judge. She seeks out orphaned or lost children to use as a source of income through social assistance programs. The accusation was devastating to Gladys's case. When confronted with the evidence of her previous activities, she quickly withdrew her claim and left the courtroom. 3 months later, the girl's adoption was finally approved. Danny legally became her father, and she officially became the baby's sister. The ceremony in court was simple but deeply emotional for the whole family. Now it's official, said the judge, signing the final documents. You are a family legal in the eyes of the law. But for Danny and the girl, they had been a family for a long time. The papers only confirmed what their hearts already knew. That night, there was a small party at home to celebrate. Bethany, Carolina, Rita, and other friends who had become extended family were present. The babies, now 2 years old and saying their first words, ran through the house laughing. How does it feel to be officially my daughter? Danny asked the girl as she blew out the candles on the celebration cake. The same as before, she replied with a smile, because you were already my dad in my heart. And as he watched his family gathered around the table, Danny reflected on the incredible journey that had brought them there. From a lost and confused man waking up in an alley with 3 babies, to father of 4 children in a house filled with love and laughter. There were still challenges ahead. There always would be. But Danny knew that as long as they had each other, they could face anything that the future brought. 2 years after the girl's official adoption, Danny thought that he had finally reached the permanent stability that his family deserved. The foundation he had created to help children in homeless situations had expanded to 3 cities. The babies were growing up healthy and happy, and the girl, now 8 years old, excelled at school as one of the brightest students in her class. It was during a normal Sunday dinner that everyone's life changed again in a completely unexpected way. The girl was helping to serve dessert when the house intercom rang. Danny went to answer it, expecting perhaps a delivery or some neighbor, but found on the other side a man he never expected to see again. My name is Dr. Marcus Finch, said the man, a grey-haired gentleman with a distinguished appearance. I was Valerie's doctor for many years. I need to talk to you about something I recently discovered. Danny hesitated. Anyone connected to Valerie still made him nervous, but there was something in the doctor's urgent expression that convinced him to let him in. What do you want? Danny asked, keeping a cautious distance. I want to tell the truth about something that Valerie forced me to hide for years, Dr. Finch replied, his hands trembling slightly. Something about the babies. Bethany, who was having dinner with them, approached when she heard the conversation. What truth? Doctor. Finch took a deep breath. Valerie didn't just use a surrogate to have the babies. She stole them. The silence that followed was deafening. Danny felt as if the floor had disappeared beneath his feet. What do you mean, stole? Carolina wasn't a desperate woman who agreed to be a surrogate for money. She was a nurse who had become naturally pregnant with triplets after a relationship with a fellow doctor. Valerie found out about the pregnancy and convinced Carolina that the babies were born with complications. The revelation struck everyone like lightning. Bethany covered her mouth with her hands, Danny leaned against the wall to avoid falling, and the girl, who had heard everything from the kitchen, approached silently. You're saying that Carolina believes her children died at birth? Bethany asked. Exactly. Valerie forced me to sign false death certificates. Carolina never knew that the babies survived. Doctor. Vinch paused, clearly struggling with years of guilt. Valerie threatened to destroy my career and harm my family if I told the truth. Danny felt a wave of nausea. Why are you telling me this now? Because Valerie is dead. She was found in her cell in prison 2 weeks ago. Suicide, according to authorities. Now that she can no longer threaten me, I need to correct this terrible mistake. The news of Valerie's death was shocking on its own, but the implications of what Dr. Vinch was revealing were devastating. If Carolina didn't know the babies were alive, if she had never voluntarily agreed to give them up, then the entire legal basis of Danny's custody was in question. Carolina needs to know, said the girl, her small voice but firm. If my brothers are alive, their mum needs to know. Danny looked at the child who had become his daughter and saw in her the same moral courage that had led her to care for unknown babies that first terrible night. She was right, even if it meant potentially losing the brothers she loved. Where is Carolina now? Danny asked. Working at a hospital in another city, Dr. Finch replied. She never fully recovered from the loss of her children, moved away to try and start a new life. Bethany offered to contact Carolina and explain the situation delicately. The call was one of the hardest any of them had ever made. Carolina first didn't believe it, then went into shock, then burst into tears of joy and despair simultaneously. My babies are alive, she repeated on the phone. Are they really alive? 2 days later, Carolina arrived in the city, accompanied by a lawyer and a therapist who was helping her process the impossible revelation. The meeting with the babies, now 4-year-olds, was loaded with emotion and confusion. The triplets didn't remember Carolina, of course. To them, Danny was the father, and the girl was the big sister. They ran to familiar arms when they saw strangers in the room hiding behind Danny's legs. They don't know me, Carolina said, tears streaming down her face. My own children don't recognize me. They were babies when you last saw them, said the girl gently, approaching Carolina. But they can learn to love you again. During the following weeks, an extremely complex legal situation developed. Carolina had incontestable biological rights over the babies, but they had developed deep bonds with Danny and the girl. Child psychologists were brought in to assess what would be best for the children. The girl, demonstrating impressive maturity for her 8 years, made a decision that surprised everyone. She asked to speak alone with Carolina, without lawyers or adults interfering. I know you're their real mum, she said to Carolina during the private conversation. And I know you love them very much. I do, Carolina confirmed, but I also see how much they love you guys. Then let's all be a family, proposed the girl simply. You can be the mom, Danny can be the dad, and I can be the big sister. Families don't have to be normal to be real. The girl's suggestion became the basis for an innovative legal solution. Carolina and Danny filed a petition for permanent shared custody, with Carolina as the legal biological mother and Danny as the legal adoptive father. The girl would be officially recognized as the older sister in all documents. It's unusual, admitted the judge during the final hearing, but considering the extraordinary circumstances and the clear well-being of the children, I believe this is the fairest solution. The decision was approved, creating a legal family that reflected the emotional reality that had developed over the years. Carolina moved to a house near Danny's, allowing the children to spend time with both parents daily. The adaptation wasn't always easy. The children needed time to understand that they now had 2 homes and 2 biological parents. There were moments of confusion, jealousy, and difficulties. But with patience, family therapy, and a lot of love, the new dynamic began to work. Dr. Finch, moved by guilt for his role in Carolina's suffering, donated a significant amount to Danny's foundation and became an active volunteer in working with separated families. His medical experience and his genuine regret transformed him into a passionate advocate for children's rights. Bethany assumed the role of official aunt to all the children, continuing her work at the foundation and serving as a bridge between Danny and Carolina whenever parental issues needed to be discussed. A year after the truth about the triplets was revealed, the expanded family had found its rhythm. The children called Carolina Mom and Danny Dad naturally, understanding instinctively that they were lucky to have two parents who loved them unconditionally. The girl, now 9 years old, had become a natural mediator between everyone, helping her younger siblings navigate between the two homes and ensuring that everyone felt loved and safe. "Do you regret anything?" Danny asked her one night, after the children had fallen asleep. "No," she replied without hesitation. "Our family is different, but it's ours, and all the bad things that happened brought us to the good things." Danny hugged his eldest daughter, thinking about how far they had come since that first terrible night under the bridge. They had faced betrayal, danger, separation, and painful revelations. But through it all, the love that united them had proven stronger than any obstacle. Now, looking to the future, Danny knew that there would still be challenges. Raising a non-conventional family in a world that preferred traditional structures would never be easy. But they had proven that true family wasn't defined by blood, law, or convention. It was defined by choice, sacrifice, and unconditional love. And that, Danny knew, was indestructible. 5 years after the formation of his unconventional family, Danny found himself standing on the porch of his house on a sunny Saturday morning, watching a scene that still moved him every day. The triplets, now 9 years old, were playing in the garden under the watchful supervision of their older sister, who at 13 had become a confident and wise teenager. Carolina arrived for the weekend breakfast that had become a tradition, carrying her famous apple pie and the radiant smile that Danny had learned to love as part of his expanded family. She had married the previous year to a kind doctor who adored the children, creating an even stronger support network for everyone. "How are the little ones today?" Carolina asked, kissing the forehead of each of the children as they ran to greet her. "The boy with the birthmark is writing a book about birds," said the eldest daughter, pointing to her brother, who was sitting under the tree with a notebook. "The girl is teaching the other brother to plant flowers, and he's pretending he doesn't like it, but adoring the attention." Danny smiled, watching how his eldest daughter had developed a deep and loving understanding of each of her siblings' unique personalities. She had become not just a sister, but a second mother to them, always protecting and guiding them with a wisdom that seemed far beyond her years. The foundation that Danny had created now operated in 12 cities and had helped more than 1,000 children find safe homes. Bethany had become national director, traveling across the country to establish new programs and train professionals who worked with traumatized children. "We received another significant donation this week," told Bethany, who had arrived for breakfast bringing reports and a proud smile. "A businessman who lost his young wife decided to use the inheritance to help orphan children. Said our story inspired him." The story of Danny and his family had become an urban legend in the city, told and retold as an example of how love can triumph over the most terrible circumstances. Journalists still occasionally requested interviews, writers wanted to turn the story into a book, and film producers had made offers to buy the rights to the story. Danny always refused politely but firmly. "Our life is not entertainment," he explained. "It's a real family, with real people who deserve privacy to grow and develop away from the spotlight." The girl had become especially protective of the family's privacy. At 13, she understood better than anyone how media attention could be invasive and harmful to children still in development. "People want to make movies about us because our story has a happy ending," she said to Danny during one of their nightly conversations. "But they don't understand that it wasn't an ending, it was a beginning." She was right, of course. The years that followed after finding stability were filled with growth, discoveries, and everyday joys that were much more meaningful than the drama that had preceded them. Danny had become a different father than he had ever imagined being. His experience living on the streets had made him more empathetic, more present, more aware that every moment with his children was precious. He participated in every school meeting, every soccer game, every dance presentation. His net worth had continued to grow over the years, but his perspective on wealth had changed completely. Money was a tool to provide security and opportunities for his family and to help other children in need. It was no longer a measure of success or personal worth. "Dad," said the boy with the birthmark one afternoon, while Danny was helping him with a school project about family, "do you regret marrying the bad woman?" It was a question that Danny had waited for years, knowing that eventually his children would ask difficult questions about his past and how they had become a family. "I don't regret it," he replied honestly, "because if I hadn't married her, you wouldn't have been born. And without you, I never would have found your older sister, never would have met your mom, Carolina, never would have discovered how real love works. But she hurt you a lot." "She did. But people sometimes do bad things for reasons they don't even understand themselves. What's important isn't what she did, it's what we did after." The children had grown up knowing the truth about their origin, but in a way that was appropriate for their ages. They knew that Valerie had done bad things, but they also knew that she didn't define who they were or how their family had formed. Carolina had become not only their biological mother, but a close friend of Danny and a confidant in all aspects of raising the children. They made important decisions together, celebrated milestones together, and had created a parental dynamic that worked perfectly for their unique circumstances. "Sometimes I think," Carolina said to Danny during one of their weekly conversations about the children, "that everything happened exactly as it should have. If Valerie hadn't done what she did, I never would have met you or our eldest daughter. The children wouldn't have the expanded family they have now. Do you believe that the suffering had a purpose?" "I believe that what we did with the suffering had a purpose," she corrected. "We chose to transform pain into love, trauma into strength, loss into gratitude." Danny's eldest daughter had excelled at school, not only academically, but as a natural leader who always advocated for younger or different children. She had inherited the courage that had led her to care for unknown babies, but now she channeled it to protect others who needed help. "I want to work at the foundation when I grow up," she announced during dinner one night. "I want to help other children like you helped me." "You can do anything you want," Danny said. "But remember that you're already helping other children just by being who you are." On her 13th birthday, Danny organized a special party for his eldest daughter. Not just a normal birthday party, but a celebration of everything she had achieved and become. Bethany, Carolina, Dr. Finch, Rita the journalist, and dozens of children that the foundation had helped were present. "I want to make a little toast," said the birthday girl when it was time for the cake. 10 years ago, I was a lonely and scared girl who didn't know if I would survive until the next day. Today, I have a family that loves me, siblings that I protect, and the chance to help other children find what I found." She paused, looking around the table at all the people who had become her extended family. "I've learned that family isn't about where you're born or who shares your blood. It's about who chooses to stay with you when everything is difficult, who celebrates your victories as if they were their own, and who loves you not despite your flaws, but including them." Her words deeply touched everyone present, many of whom wiped away tears as they applauded. Later that night, after the guests had left and the children had fallen asleep, Danny found himself again on the porch, reflecting on the extraordinary journey that had brought them there. He thought about the man he had been 5 years ago, focused on wealth, status, and superficial successes. That man had lost everything in one night, but in losing everything, he had found something much more valuable. The brave girl who had become his daughter approached, as she often did, when she sensed that he was in one of his contemplative moments. "What are you thinking about, Dad?" "I'm thinking," he said, putting his arm around her, "about how the greatest fortune I've ever accumulated isn't in the bank or in investments. It's here, in this house, with you guys. And I'm thinking," he continued, looking at the stars that shone over his family, "that the boy I met in that alley, hurt and confused, never imagined that one day he would be the richest man in the world." "Rich in dollars?" she asked, joking. "Rich in love," he replied, "and that's the only kind of wealth that really matters." And as father and daughter stood on the porch, watching the moon illuminate the garden where 3 happy children slept safely in their rooms, Danny knew that he had finally found the most precious treasure of all, a family built on unconditional love, mutual sacrifice, and the courage to transform tragedy into triumph. The 4-year-old beggar girl, who had found a wounded man and 3 crying babies, had become a confident teenager, surrounded by love and endless possibilities. And the family that began in despair on a cold night had become a source of hope and inspiration for hundreds of other families. It was, Danny concluded, the happiest ending any of them could have imagined. Not because it was perfect, but because it was real, genuine, and built on the most solid foundation possible. People who chose to love each other unconditionally, no matter what the world threw at them. If you liked this video, please subscribe to my channel. I promise to bring videos every day that will make your life happier. Comment what you thought of my story, giving a grade from 0 to 10. And thank you very much.